Hi, Rudolph.
Hi.
It's such a pleasure to finally meet you in person and finally meet your prints. I'm very excited about our collaboration, and I'm very, very much looking forward to learn more about your practice and your art, and just to get to know you and the art that you produce. First of all, of course, I'm very much interested how you ended up becoming an artist. What was the initial spark, and how did you know that that would be your career path?
Oh, hi, Yulia. It's really nice to meet you. I'm very excited to be collaborating with you guys. And that is a funny question. My dad had this story when I was young, maybe about like 6 years old. And I took a blue marker and I colored in all the back seats of the car. And I was super excited, and I was like, Dad, come look at what I did, you know? And I had this big grin on my face, and he saw how excited I was, and so he couldn't get angry at me. And he said, ever since that moment, I've been drawing. You know, I've always had something in my hand and always drawing. And you know, it's been a kind of a journey and a process. It wasn't something I always thought about doing. In fact, when I first went to undergrad, I thought about being a different kind of artist, a medical illustrator. Because my mom, she works with doctors, and she understood that, you know, this is kind of this growing field, and using art as a way to combine and teach for doctors. And it's a very sort of specific approach to art making, right? It has to understand anatomy, and it's very, like, no deviation outside of that. But I took a printmaking course while in my undergrad, and ever since that moment, I knew making prints was the way of making for me, and have just never looked back.
What is it so special about printing? It's not the most obvious medium.
No, it is not. I had never done prints before my undergrad. Didn't really know much about it, but I find that it's really nice to trust when things just feel right in your body. And for me, that was printmaking.
So it's very hands-on process.
Yeah, it's very hands-on. You're in your body a lot. You're moving, whether you're doing screen printing or lithography or intaglio. It's all about this sort of connection of the body and the mind, articulating these sort of imagery, and then it's very sort of like meditative in this sort of repetition that you do. And I think that's what initially attracted me to printmaking was the process. You know, it was something that you could master in a way. And now my infatuation has grown, and my love for the process has grown in this way where now, instead of just it being a process, you know, this meditation that you lose yourself in, has grown to be this really beautiful medium for me in terms of its history. You know, it is a lesser known history than we think about in terms of art history, compared to like sculpture or painting, which are these sort of, the bigger forms of art. But printmaking has kind of been running alongside.
It's been there for a while.
Yeah, you know. And you think about it, it's this history of how we shared things. You know, it's how we shared information, it's how we shared images, and that is what keeps me so enthralled with printmaking. In the same way that I want to share images with people in the world around me, it's that same sort of idea that started printmaking, and I think that's what keeps me doing it.
But your visual language is so rich. It's like it's almost like a whole story going on each print. And what's behind all of that? It's definitely there is something you are telling, and with like you have very definite, very strong voice. But what's behind all of these images?
So a lot of my imagery is trying to expand the notion of representation in classical art, drawing on this history and the technique of printmaking to reinterpret paintings, to translate them so that a wider audience could access them. I take that same sort of idea and I try to reinterpret classical work into a contemporary sense, showing a contemporary mixed up world. I explore my own biracial identity within that to show these two-headed fluid identities within the work to try to create space and allow for a diverse world. I think art has this really beautiful power to shape how we want to see and what we expect the world to look like, especially visual arts and visual media. And so by trying to co-opt that and to subvert that, I want to create a world in which we can expect and make space for the rich diversity that being human is, and for this intercultural mixing and to break down these racial barriers and being, just to allow the fluidity of identity to come forward.
Yeah, it looks like almost not only different cultures, but also different timelines, different places, kind of collapse in one space of your single image. It's fascinating, and you really have to stop and explore it. It's amazing what you do. I think it's not just unique. It's also very deep in terms of how everyone can relate to this kind of artwork in a very, very personal way. Do you even think, is it just about yourself, or do you think about everyone who would possibly be experiencing your artwork? So is it like a dialogue, or it's more of a monologue for you?
It's definitely a dialogue. Definitely a dialogue. I just think I think I can't be created, and I don't exist separate from the rest of the world and from all the people that I interact with. And so in that same way, it's like uses my experience as a jumping off point, but it's like you said, it is about opening it up and letting other people come in and see themselves. Like, I love nothing more than people being able to see themselves in my own work. That is what gives me and like a sense of like doing something right, and like you said, it is about stopping and exploring and slowing down, because I think that's how we get to the truth of who we are as humans, right? We make these snap judgments, sure, off the basis, but then when you slow down and you look into it, it is this rich and complex and this deep sort of thing that you keep, seeing something and learning something new every time you interact with it. And so just trying to encapsulate that sort of complexity and depth is a challenge in and of itself, but is what I want to sort of encapsulate and allow people that room to see themselves in this complex world.
Yeah, it's definitely very welcoming. I think when you first have a glimpse on the work, you are automatically drawn to it because it's a very familiar image. It is something that your eye is used to see, because it comes from the classical art, and your eye doesn't have this sort of, nothing stops it from engaging with the work, and then it sort of unfolds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. That's very intentional. I think drawing on that aura of classical art is really important to me. When you think about and talk to people about what do you think about art and how do you think it, they bring up like Renaissance and stuff like that, which is beautiful. The Renaissance is an incredible period, and these masters of their crafts. But we're so used to seeing that image, right? Like you said, we just kind of pass it by, we skip over it. But the chance to subvert it and to add something new is what I hope gives people pause, right? It is something familiar. And this is, I guess, where it really becomes biographical in a sense, where growing up, there was a lot of questions about what am I? Where do I belong and where do I fit in these racial sort of categories that we're all looking for? And if you look over me, you can kind of make passing guesses, but I'm biracial, and so there is a complexity in that thing. I don't try to pick one side or another. My family is both black and white. Culturally, I'm both black and white, and so kind of thinking about that in the same way, it's using classical artwork as the sort of basis for printmaking and translating those paintings, but then expanding it into something where when you stop and you're like, wait a second, there's so much more going on here, right? It is richer. It's this newer sort of world that is being built than these sort of 200-300-year-old worlds that have already existed.
So you started your education in the US, and then you moved into London. What do you think about two different, I don't know, cultures? What is it like, the art scene, the art market, and everything? How do you find it?
They're very different. I think the US is a very unique place. It is very multicultural and it is very expansive. But I think a city like London is multicultural in a different way. And I think it almost exists more cosmopolitan in that way. It's like you get on the tube and you hear, 5-6 different languages. That doesn't necessarily happen in the States in the same way. I think there is more of this assimilation to this identity. And I think America is beautiful because it's this rich melting pot. But I think London, just with the size and the expansiveness, becomes so much richer of a melting pot. And so I think just my experience in terms of those things has been really interesting. And in terms of the art market too, they are very different worlds. When I graduated and I moved back to Chicago, a lot of the art that I was doing was very much on the DIY scene and very underground, which I know also still exists in London, but there is also this upper level as well. We have like major galleries like Hauser and Wirth and David Zwirner here. And so I think you just have this much broader extreme where you only get pockets of that spectrum in the US. So
yeah, here it's more institutionalized and I think more obvious. Well, first of all, because it's a big city and it's more of, I think it's more systematized than in smaller towns. But how do you find the access to all of these galleries? I mean, they are there, but is it easy to get as an artist to be represented by those galleries? Sometimes it feels like there is a very decent gap between the artists, the creators, and the showcase of their works. So what do you think about that? How do you find it here?
Yeah, I think it is just as challenging, or if not more, just with the number of people here in a city like London, right? You just have, at a city of, 10 million, you have so many more people that you're sort of in competition with. I won't say you're competing against, because I don't necessarily see the art world as a competition like that, but if you are trying to go for major gallery representation in that way, you have to take into account that there's so many more people in this space also trying to do the same thing. And so I do think it is hard to break through and kind of get the chance. But I think it's very similar in the States, right? Whether you're in New York or LA or Chicago, it's hard to push and get a big institution to take a risk on you. And I think in that same way, it takes time to develop. I think London is good in the sense, though, that there are more places where you can continue to develop and take your time, where I think not every major US city has that same sort of space to allow for that development to keep on going and keep happening.
And in terms of people, the collectors or just general public, do you find them approachable? Do you find them also easily accessible? Like what is the way for an artist to get access to the public? Is it just through galleries, or do you think there are lots of ways?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways, and it really depends on your practice and how you want to think about it. And I think it's something that the art world is sort of addressing and coming to terms with, as this sort of gallery model. I think is slowing down in a way, because that doesn't always have to be the way the show art. You know, we can do like much smaller sort of shows. And collections, you know, and I think there's more opportunities in a place like London, with like open calls and alternative ways of showing, you know, like the safe houses out in East London, other alternative spaces. You know, you don't have to think about like, oh man, if I don't get into David Zwirner, then I'm not a real artist. Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's a lot of these smaller institutions too who are willing to collaborate with artists in meaningful ways, you know, whether, you know, it's something like the British Library, which is a huge archive, but they have artist residencies, you know, which is a whole nother way of showcasing and making art, you know, and I just don't necessarily see, again, those like same opportunities.
No, but that's wonderful that you don't have this intimidation on trying other things, because I think sometimes the young artists have this sort of fear to make a wrong step, you know, to make a wrong move and lose a chance to be represented by a major gallery, because there is a certain way, at least, you know, you feel like it is. And I guess many artists are afraid to, I don't know, take some side sort of steps to explore any other ways to show their works, just because they fear of losing this opportunity to be represented by the gallery. It's like keeping your reputation completely clear. It's nice that you don't have this fear. It seems like you're very grounded in what you do and very sure of yourself. This is actually amazing. It's a rare thing. Yeah.
Well, thanks. And I think you're hitting the nail on the head, right? Where I think with representation, should that be the route that you want to go, is a double-edged sword, you know, and I think about with my practice, I don't necessarily know if that's something that I desire, because I want to continue exploring and pushing the ways that I make and think about artwork. When you do get represented for a certain sort of language that you use, and you know, for better or for worse, right, you get locked into that way of communicating. But I think, you know,
like a certain demand already is imposed upon you. Like
yeah, you know, I'd have to make prints that look exactly like this, you know, and I'm still pretty young, and that'd be pretty boring.
Yeah, I agree with you, absolutely, yeah. But what would be your goal? I don't know, dream or something. Where would you like your art to be represented?
I think about this a lot, and maybe this is still a very lofty ideal, but I would love to work with museums, especially in a way that gives my art access, a wide public access. I use a lot of archives in the creation of my images. You know, they're based off of old prints or based off of old paintings. And so I would love to be able to work with institutions to draw from their collections and to reinterpret their collections, and then have these exposés that recontextualize these historical artifacts that people in the public can come through and see, you know. And instead of having these sort of rigid old paintings that nobody can see themselves in, start to
like serving as a translator for interpreter. This is amazing. That's a very ambitious and I think very much needed wish. I'm sure it is something that many museums would be willing to do, just to revive the collections, to have a contemporary view on them, and to engage the audience more. Yeah, I think that this is where your art belongs, really. This is a very, very spot on wish of yours. But you also teach, right? Where is it that you teach?
I teach at the Royal College of Art and at the Royal Academy schools.
Okay. And how do you find the students today? Is it I've heard that there's much more students right now than it used to be even 10 years ago. So many more young people want to pursue the artistic career. But how do you find it in terms of both talent and their way, like the opportunities that they have?
I mean, I will say both of the schools that I teach at are very different. And so it's an interesting look at postgraduate education right now. With the RCA, there's a lot more students, and they definitely have bigger classes now than what they historically had. And I don't necessarily mean that they have less talent, but it's definitely a much broader view and ways of making, right? I teach in the print workshop, and we mostly service students in the print MA, but not everybody in that MA is making prints. You know, it's a much more expanded sort of way of thinking and looking at printed material. Whereas the Royal Academy schools, it's a much smaller program, and it's a longer program. And so there as well, it's a different sort of approach, and it's more, you get to see the growth a little bit more in the individuals, right? And that they're pursuing their education there. And so I think they're just two different models of how education works, but I don't necessarily think one is better than the other. I love doing both because I feel like as a technician and as a teacher, it's about using my skills to facilitate the projects and the dreams of the students who come, you know, regardless of what they are in the path. And it's my hope that working together and them learning how to make prints and through conversations that we can have, that their practice grows and expands, which is what I hope for as a teacher.
But talking about technique, can you tell us more about your process and what you do technically?
Yeah. So I tend to do a lot of lithography, which is this way of printing off of the surface using oil and water and those properties. So you make a chemical stencil on a matrix on like a flat surface, and that stencil will hold on to grease in the oil-based inks, and the negative area, like an area like this, will hold on to water. So that way when you roll it with the ink, all this gets inked up and this rejects it because it's holding on to water. And I choose that way because it has a way of capturing drawing and mark making, unlike the other forms of printing. You know, so when this gets printed, it looks exactly like my drawing. You know, like this one up here,
it does look like a drawing, yeah.
Right? But I can print it 30 to hundreds of times, right? And they'll all look exactly like that. And I start out my drawings with the digital collages. I normally get an image stuck in my head for like weeks at a time. And so this is Peter Paul Rubens' The Garden of Love. And I don't know why, but I had just been thinking about that painting for weeks. I was like, I can't get this painting out of my head. And so I had to do something about it, you know? And so I collage all these different elements. They're from various different prints, from various different time periods. They're from magazines. They're from advertisements. And then once I have that digital collage done, I turn it into a drawing. And so it's very important to me in my process to draw it all by hand at this point. And this draws to that history of printmaking that I was talking about, that really enthralls me as this way of translating the mark of others. And so now it's sort of drawing on this history of translation that printmaking has always had, especially in the dissemination of paintings early on, and trying to co-opt that as a way to use and talk about my own sort of visual language. And then from there, I can print it. You know, I can print it anywhere from 5 to 20 times. And I think what's nice about printmaking, you know, whether it's a piece like this that goes on to get turned into a paper relief, or, you know, like here, this is a stage of the print that again gets turned into a relief and multimedia collage. With these multiples, I don't feel like they're super precious. And so I can cut them up, tear them up. I do watercolors in some of them. And so I'm still like expanding and playing with the imagery that I can work with before finally wanting to like settle on a certain thing and being like, okay, this is the final way that this is going to look.
It's very interesting because oftentimes art is a pure self-expression, but in your practice it seems like you are both expressing yourself and restricting yourself and kind of fighting this, the image, the original image, and then your idea that you have. It's kind of a battle of your self-expression and something that has been already expressed.
Yeah. I just like to struggle a little bit, you know. I think, you know, when you become a printmaker, there's something a little masochistic about yourself in the process, especially because it's a slow process, right? These drawings take weeks to do, and then, you know, it's another week of printing, and it's very physical. But I think there's just something interesting about working in the parameters that somebody else has set for you. And I think I'm kind of wrapped in that from my past experiences as well. I worked at the collaborative printer, and so in these workshops I would work with other artists, and I wasn't producing my work, but producing their work. And so using my skills to facilitate print projects, right? A lot of times they had never made prints before, and so it was up to me to sort of guide them along in that process. And in that way, right, I'm already working with the parameters that somebody else has set. You know, they have this way of making that they're used to and comfortable. And as the professional printer, you know, it's about trying to make printing feel comfortable for them as well. And so I think I'm just really used to working within those sort of guidelines and stuff like that. And then, yeah, and it just kind of imposes themselves on myself. But yeah.
But is it more about freedom or the opposite, like the obligation to express something? What is it?
I think for me it's about the obligation to express something. It isn't like, yeah, like I feel a deep need to make these imagery. And I think that's why certain images get stuck in my head, you know. It's like my brain is like, it's time, you need to rework this, you know. It needs to be contextualized for today. And I think that compulsion is what drives me to keep making. And again, like using my skills to facilitate and to recontextualize it nowadays, it becomes more important.
That's fascinating. Yeah, very interesting. Coming back to our collaboration, how do you feel about it? It is definitely something off the beaten path. So what do you think about having your art entering someone's kitchen? I don't know, like some places that are far away from galleries or museums, just some daily life rituals.
I'm excited about it. You know, I'm glad that you bring up the idea of a daily life ritual because, and entering people's homes, because for me, I think that's where art belongs. You know, my favorite thing is when people buy a piece and they're like, I have it framed and it hangs in this room, you know, and I'm like, nice, that's where it's supposed to belong, right? And so the possibility for more people to be able to access and put, you know, some color and some life into their homes is extremely exciting and very important to me, you know. As someone who depicts people having a good time, I want the opportunity for people to have a good time around it.
Absolutely. And also, like coming back to your meditative process as well, like opening the pack and actually paying attention to what's on it, not just, you know, this consumption without even thinking, but also stopping for a while and actually paying attention to what you have like an artwork in your hands,
Yeah.
in your kitchen. So that's what makes me doing that. I hope you will also feel that way.
Yeah, definitely. You know, there's become something precious about it. And I know wrapped up in this world, packaging is often disposable, but when it becomes something made with intention and care, you know, you slow down a little bit around it, you know, and it's like it becomes important.
I mean, there are so many amazing artists out there, and there are so many amazing products out there as well. It kind of feels very natural to facilitate the meetup, you know, to sort of kind of reimagine the idea of art belonging to the walls or to the galleries or to the museums, and actually highlighting that art should be everywhere, and self-expression, expression, artistic way is something that every one of us, if not practicing, then at least appreciating in daily life should be easier.
Yeah, I completely agree. You know, like art comes from the Latin word meaning skill, and I think skill is developed through practice, right? And so whether your practice is making coffee in the morning or, you know, drawing, right? It doesn't matter to me. There's an art in all of that, right? And so, yeah, I think the opportunity to bring those things closer together is incredible, right? And like, yeah, it's like you said, just having it around in the daily life makes people appreciate it, or can appreciate it so much more.
Yeah, I'm very glad for our conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I have no doubts actually that you will end up doing what you want to do, because I think in reinterpreting some museum works that we all know and bringing them back to life and making them more accessible for more people is an amazing goal. So I wish you as much success as possible, and I just love your work, and I'm really, really proud that we did.
Thank you, Yulia. It's been an absolute pleasure.